just getting ready to stream, everybody, so that you're aware of that. We'll just go live. I've taken out everything we don't need.
Okay,
We are ready to go.
so I think we're live, everybody. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to a special council meeting being held on Tuesday, the 8th of April at 6:15. I want to thank everybody for pivoting at short notice from the previous agenda we were going to look at. I'll begin with the Kaurna acknowledgement. The City of Prospect acknowledges that we are on the traditional country of the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains region, and we pay our respect to elders past, present and emerging. The Council Pledge, we recognise and respect, that's not the Council Pledge. Part 2 of the Kaurna acknowledgement, we recognise and respect their cultural heritage, beliefs and relationships with the land, and we acknowledge that they are of continuing importance to the Kaurna people living today. And now the Council Pledge. We seek wisdom and understanding as we face the duties of our united task, praying for the peace and prosperity of our city. Okay, item 2 on leave, there are nil. Item 3, apologies, we've received an apology from Councillor Mark Group. Item 4, indication of intention to declare a conflict of interest. Would anybody like to foreshadow their intention to declare a conflict of interest? That being the case, we'll move on to reports for decision. There is only one item on the agenda. 5.1, Broadview Tennis Precinct upgrade. Recommendations on page 4. I'm going to recommend that we suspend meeting procedures for 30 minutes. Can I get a show of hands? Hang on, have we voted on show of hands? I got it right, cool. Alright, unanimous, so we'll suspend meeting procedures. It's 6:18, so 6:48 or thereabouts. I wanted to invite the CEO, first of all, to give us a synopsis. The agenda was distributed at 2 o'clock this afternoon, and most people have had a chance to have a review of it, but maybe not a deep dive. So I'd like to invite, first of all, the CEO to give us a synopsis, and then we'll open up for questions. Councillor Baker.
This is a council meeting. Is it being recorded on YouTube? Because I think it should be. It is. Just checking. So we'll see the record.
Thanks for checking this. All right, where were we? CEO update, questions. We've got a couple of the senior team members to answer questions, and then we will resume formal meeting procedures and look at the recommendations. So over to you, CEO. What would you say would be a reasonable amount of time to allow you to provide a synopsis, just so I can hold you to that?
Set my KPI at 3 minutes.
3 minutes, great. All right, 6:22 we're done.
So, through you, Mr. Mayor, just a quick update, members, on what's changed over the past 2 weeks. Exactly 2 weeks ago, you sat here and directed that this item, which was reported on the agenda for your consideration, be laid on the table. You also asked the Mayor and I to go off and do some further advocacy, which we have done, and the first of those meetings was held with Minister Andrea Michaels and her staff, together with representatives of Broadview Tennis Club and Tennis SA on Friday morning. So what has materially changed since 2 weeks ago? Really only one thing, and that is that it has been made abundantly clear to us that our funding strategy, which anticipated council contributing $500,000 and seeking the remainder of those funds, in essence, from the state and federal governments, was basically a non-starter. And as a result, council should strongly consider, if it feels it wants to progress this and have any opportunity of securing appropriate funding to deliver this project as part of this federal election cycle, it should try to get to a funding model that contributes at least a third together with partners, Tennis SA, the Broadview Tennis Club, and anybody else really who's going to toss some money in, that we need to stump up at least a third of the cash and thereby seek only that two-third remainder from a combination of state and federal sources. If we cannot secure that level of funding, then we almost certainly will not get support. And as a result, given the short time frame now and a very clear window that we have for the federal election campaign in progress, Council really needs to make a decision as soon as possible on whether or not it can accommodate that one-third level of funding. And if so, empower the Mayor and I to go off and continue advocacy on that basis with both the federal candidates and the current federal member for the seat of Adelaide, and also with the relevant state authorities as potential co-funders. The report before you provides a possible pathway to achieve that. My directors are here to answer your questions in relation to that, but in essence, the difference is now, as opposed to the secondary funding strategy in the report you reviewed 2 weeks ago, we don't have to find 50% funding, we now only have to find 33% funding. So there's $1.7 odd million difference there, which means that we can essentially package this up as a renewal and new capital opportunity that Council does have the money to fund without forcing an impact on rates. It will create significant opportunity costs for the Council though by delaying a range of projects which are reported in attachment 2 of the report in front of you. Those delays will be some years in duration. However, it can be done. Of course, there are alternatives, members. We haven't had a huge amount of time to pull this together, but those alternatives do include things like additional rate funding, service level cuts and the like, but those, we have not had the time or the opportunity to review those. This really is a simple question of, do you want this? If you do, then you're going to have to make some hard decisions. And those decisions are essentially reflected in attachment 2. I'm sure you have questions both about what this means in terms of scope, scale, timing, delivery, and the opportunity cost projects. That's why Mr. Delenn is here to answer your questions, but also the long-term financial plan impact, also things like the operating model, cost impacts, depreciation. Both Mr. Delenn and Ms. Batty can answer your questions in that regard. I think I've gone mildly over my 3 minutes.
Just 25%. Actually, thank you, CEO. So, open to the floor for questions. Fastest finger first.
There we go. So if we do this, move ahead, where does that leave us if we have an opportunity to act on a future depot site?
Can you just provide a bit more clarification?
So let's say that we find somewhere in, I don't know, Cormac Road, Wingfield, and it's like $1.5 million or something like that. It's perfect, and we can, you know, relocate the depot. It's absolutely perfect. Does that preclude us from, you know, acting on that, securing a depot?
I think there's two parts to that. The first part I can answer, and that is that we're, as you all know, we're investigating opportunities to co-share elsewhere as opposed to purchasing property. But CEO, with regards to the potential to increase our borrowing here, and then if a future opportunity such as that required us to borrow additional funds, how does that place us?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, firstly, we've been pretty clear with members that the capacity to borrow money to purchase a site for a depot is essentially off the table. Having said that, since we provided you with that advice, we actually do have some capital capacity, which was discussed in the past tranche of budget workshops.
Yep.
The anticipated proposal taps into a significant portion of that. Ms. Batty?
So, as we outlined in the budget workshops, we put a provision of $2 million in 26-27 and 27-28 that is unallocated at this point in time. And the assumption is that we would buy in order to spend that $2 million, and the proposal that you have in the report today includes using $1 million of that to fund Broadview. So you'd be left with $1 million in 26-27 and still the $2 in 27-28. However, the underlying proviso at this point is that the written advice we have from the LGFA the last written advice we have from the LGFA is that we don't have borrowing capacity until 27, 28. So the fact that we've modelled it doesn't necessarily mean that they will actually loan us the money.
Anything else on
No,
those
I think
lines?
that was my biggest question.
Councillor Nutt.
Just two questions to start. The first one is, have any discussions occurred with Steve Georgianos or Amy Grantham as regard to the appetite that the federal government has to funding these from either party?
Yep. So conversations have been held with both Steve Georgianos and Amy Grantham, and also other senior Liberal representatives as well. Steve Georgianos's office got back to us with a copy of the letter that they'd sent to Canberra, and also this is not confidential, is it? Or it isn't anymore. I don't think it is confidential.
So
I guess their advice was to explore other mixes of funding as opposed to asking the federal government for the entire amount. And they strongly encouraged us to investigate that and get back to them fairly quickly, because, as we know, it's not long to go. In the meetings with Amy Grantham and one of the shadow ministers, strong interest in the project, but the general sentiment again was this would look a lot better if there was a spread of funding sources. So yeah, we have, in the last week, we've had those conversations. We have another meeting with Steve Georgianos next week, I believe, or even this Friday.
I can't remember exactly when it is, but it is booked.
Yeah, so we have another meeting with Minister Georgianos in the next week.
So at this stage, no sort of indication
Monday.
on successfulness of any?
Well, not at this point in time, because when the motion was put on the table at the last meeting, we've gone down this path of continuing the advocacy, and the strong sense we get from all parties that we've spoken to is that we need to come back with something different. So depending on the outcome of tonight's meeting, we'll have something different to go back to them with. The team will reconstruct the bid paperwork, and then we'll have meetings with both sides again to represent.
Secondly, probably a sort of left field question. Obviously, the cricket club's part of the PLP. I understand that. But again, the PLP hasn't been decided on. We don't know what we're doing with the whole PLP and the cricket club and whatnot. What's the condition difference between the the Broadview Tennis Club rooms versus the cricket club rooms at present?
It's one for you, CEO.
I might ask Mr. DeLanda to provide his more expert view on the relative condition of the two facilities.
Through the chair, I don't have the detailed data in front of me, Councillor Nelson, other than, I suppose, my own anecdotal understanding of the state of both facilities. They're very different facilities. One is a very small club room. If you've been to Broadview, it's effectively maybe 8 by 4 metres, if that, in terms of size, versus the cricket club room might be 30 by 10. So substantial footprint difference and two-storey. The cricket club room, in my opinion, is in far worse condition with respect to structure. It's got structural faults in it. We know the roof is leaking. Like I said, we have to invest in that roof, and we don't really want to do that ahead of a full reconstruction. We know that the facility is well and truly past its use-by date with respect to the level of service it provides in its change rooms and toilets. Having said that, we have a tennis club room that doesn't even have a toilet within the actual club room itself, and they have to rely on the public toilet that's adjoining the facility. Has been built by club members 60 years ago, I think, in that order, and is a very simple facility. So they're both in, I'd say, end of life. If I had to pick, a winner from a loser from in terms of the quality of the facilities is the cricket club, because it is certainly failing. It's failing in terms of structurally and as well as does have challenges from an accessibility perspective as well.
That's it for now. I might come back later.
Thank you. Can you hear the thoughts of everybody around the table? So, Councillor Tweed Nguyen.
Can I just check? So even if we are signed, if we go a third, it's not even certain that we will get, it won't be successful if state of federal won't is that right?
It's a bit of a domino effect. So we may well approve that we will contribute 3.03 million, and then the next stage is to go to the federal parties, which is the next cab off the rank because the election is around the corner. And then if we were fortunate enough to receive funding and that party gain power, then the next level would be to work closely with the state government to see what we could secure from a funding point of view thereafter. So that's the order of things. So yeah, even if we approve tonight to go forward with our contribution, that doesn't guarantee anything thereafter. But from our feedback, it gives us a better chance. But I don't know whether that's a 0 chance to a 2% chance or a 0 chance to a 20% chance. We don't know that.
And with the funding strategy, in regards to the new loan, has that gone through the board committee? Have you said are they aware about this idea that we might we're seeking a new loan through the LGFA?
I suspect it hasn't because this is very new, but I might hand over to the CEO to explain how that will work.
So, through you, Mr. Mayor, I might ask Ms. Batty to take a slightly different question if I can, and that is the additional borrowing capacity that you referred to before, Ms. Batty. Have the Audit Committee considered that at all in the context of our capacity to fund any capital expenditure in those 2 years you referred to?
So the very short answer is no. The Audit Committee will review the draft annual budget and business plan on the 22nd of April. That's their next scheduled meeting, and that would be ahead of Council receiving that plan to approve for consultation. So at this point in time, they've not had the opportunity to consider that at all.
Can I potentially ask another follow-up question, more as much for my benefit as for Councillor Wynne's? Upon what is your level of confidence in that additional capacity for funding? Like, do you have a high level of confidence in that, and if so, what's that based on?
So the reason that we've included it is because the projected surpluses over the we have the capacity within the band of our existing assumptions, so rates at 3.5% over the longer term. We're still factoring in the indexation of our general cost structure within the business. The surpluses are all within the margins of what's appropriate. It's within the general bands of our financial ratios. So based on the data metrics that we're looking at, it seems a reasonable assumption to make. I'm just very mindful that that's obviously not necessarily the assessment of a lender, which is what the LGFA will be undertaking.
Thank you, Zach. Answer your question, Councillor Wynne.
Yes, I just have some to follow on. So we make a decision about funding proposals tonight, and it goes to the Audit Committee, and they don't. They don't. Yeah, they don't recommend that we go ahead with this. What happens then?
Yeah.
So, firstly, I mean, the Audit Committee can make recommendations. They obviously can't direct Council to do anything. Noting again that the Audit Committee will also be guided by staff advice, and obviously coming out of this meeting, we may have a conversation to have with the LGFA ahead of the Audit Committee discussion, which would clearly give, one would hope, further confidence to the Audit Committee if indeed you trust the fact that we have 2 CPAs on staff who've done the work and are inherently conservative people, if I can put it that way. So, you know, if there's I trust their level of confidence in terms of being able to give the Audit Committee enough assurance that spending 25% of what they feel we have in terms of lending capacity or borrowing capacity in that period, I suspect that won't be a challenge. But of course, if the Audit Committee recommendations shift and adjust, we're going to need to pivot. And again, we can't be committed to any of this until we sign a grant agreement. So there's always time for council to back out before that, even though that can create some challenges if indeed an election commitment's been made. But I also suspect, members, that if you're committed that much to the project, that if we can't find that $1 million, you might be more inclined to look at a funding strategy more akin to that presented as the second tranche of the funding strategy back on the 28th of March, which relies more on 25th of March, which relies more on renewal. Again, not my comfort zone, but members still have options.
Thanks. Councillor Becker.
Yeah, look, thanks staff for putting this all together. I'm still a bit uncomfortable because it's only come to us 2 o'clock this afternoon. And look, I'm just similar to Councillor Nelson. What would give me surety is an up-to-date asset management report that clearly states the condition of our assets and the community benefit for the assets we're investing in. So I understand, obviously, Tense Club's done a whole lot of work and advocacy over many, many years, and I think, you know, we've come to this point because we haven't landed on something. However, I'm just, you know, we're on video, there are other clubs watching. You know, I'd love to have in front of me a hierarchy of why we've made this particular decision. And we have to make informed decision making, and I don't feel I'm informed making this decision. And that's probably something a little bit for debate, but even the way the options are put, I'm even more comfortable leaving on the table to maybe some different options come back to us with extra information, quite frankly.
Thank you, Councillor Becker. I guess the issue we have is that we're rapidly running out of time if we want to have something to go back to federal candidates with. The election is, within the next month or thereabouts, I think. So I would agree with you, and I think that the staff would agree with you as well, that more time would have been favourable. However, in this instance, I don't think we've got more time.
So I'll just offer that I think if we look at all the other clubs, we could face a Section 270 if people say, well, you haven't made a decision based on data. I'm just a bit concerned about our due process going through audit committee, asset management, and being proper public engagement on this meeting. So, I mean, obviously, you need to pivot. I get that. We need to be agile, and I thank you for bringing the motion, but I've just got some concerns.
Is there anything that you would consider putting into the recommendation that we're going to discuss and vote on that would help give you comfort, Councillor?
Well, it's actually the information, so much like Councillor Nelson's question.
So nothing that you wouldn't like to add an additional.
I'll save that for debate.
This might be a good time to get something in there quickly and easily. If you did want to get something in there to avoid an amendment and to test my skills on how to manage that. So if there's anything, I'll move on to someone else. And before we finish up, if there is anything that you would like to consider including in the recommendation, then I'd be definitely open to hearing that. Okay, so we've got a few more people we haven't heard from. Councillor Bundy.
Yes, on page 8, the first dot point, beginning the council's long-term financial plan reflects the approved asset management plan for the council, and then it goes on to say about as a general rule creates part of what we're possibly looking at here, creates risks for council's long-term viability, as ASCOSA has advised. So I'm just wondering, do we have any comfort, even though we haven't had advice from our audit committee yet, about will we possibly be in trouble with ASCOSA?
CEO.
So I might flick part of this list of his value, but before I do, this particular proposal, members will recall the CEO comment that accompanied the last report, which was very, very, I was very challenged by the idea of taking direct renewal funding and applying to an asset which is clearly a significant upgrade to that which is there. I didn't feel that on balance that was advisable, and I felt that that mix of funding to fund that degree of an upgrade would not be viewed by SCOSA in a positive light. This proposal at the 1/3 level is far more. I wouldn't be concerned about it for that reason, because I think that the level of renewal funding that is incorporated into this funding level is appropriate to the level of actual renewal that the facility will see, and that the upgrade component will be adequately covered by the new capital allocations from debt and by the significant input of funds from the state and federal government in the order of $6.7 million. That, to me, is a balance that I feel from a renewal standpoint would pass scrutiny, and I would suggest to you quite close scrutiny. For me, what I feel members should be considering more carefully is the opportunity cost, and really to Councillor De Backer's point, of allocating all that renewal funding to this asset for those 3 years, essentially, primarily those 2 years, 26, 27, 27, 28. Ms. Batty, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I can only really affirm that as SCOSA has been looking at the council's financial documentation and sustainability, the message that they've repeated each time is that they are concerned about councils diverting renewal funding into new projects. So instead of investing in the maintenance and keeping up the same service standards around our assets, that some councils are choosing to take that funding and putting it into upgrading particular assets. As Chris has outlined, this strategy has been structured in a way to avoid that, because it is keeping the level of renewal funding investment within the envelope that you had already seen through the 3-year capital plan through the workshops. The difference being the opportunity cost that's already come up with the projects that have been named in the attachment that would be deferred. And at this point in time, the earliest that those projects could be commenced, and I'll defer to Sam on this question, would be 27, 28. But obviously, all else being equal, we might have been doing some different projects because we have already done those over the last 3 years. So that's the sort of core dilemma.
And subsequently, at what stage, if we're going for this sort of money, with the, it has some financial risks and that have been outlined, would we be expecting the Broadview Tennis Club to provide a prudential plan? I've just lost the spot here where it asks about that. Oh yes, a business plan and prudential review.
So you go.
So, Mr. Delano, perhaps you can speak to that in terms of your expected timeframe, and also the relative responsibilities in terms of that process, because we have done it recently before.
Yeah, so through the chair, certainly as was presented in the previous report to 25th of March, that's certainly the steps that would need to be taken. A prudential review, need to be a business plan, to have a work through with the club in respect to the facility that's as it's currently designed, the capacity to run that, generate income, offset the expenses of the facility. We know that the expenses of that facility would be significantly greater than their current facility. We have the experience at the Broadview Football Club, where we spent the best part of 9 or 10 months working with them very closely to develop their business plan, and that was a very useful exercise in ensuring that they were sustainable, and they understood what they had to do to be sustainable from day one, and set targets for themselves, which have been achieved in the main part from a commercial side of the business. That is something that we would need to do with the tennis club, albeit there is a risk that they don't have the same capacity to generate income that a football club has, in terms of the numbers of people coming through the door, as well as the business model for the football club was heavily reliant on beer sales. That was effectively the large portion of how they generated the income associated with keeping the lights on and paying the bills. So aside from some of the commercial aspects of that facility that aren't in play yet. There's no gym in this instance, and a commercial caterer, kiosk manager isn't in play in the tennis facility at this point. Albeit that is issues that we need to work through. We're not yet at the point that we have worked through them, and I suggest there's no utility in doing that until we can sign off what we actually are delivering. At this point, I don't even have a resolution to say what we actually are delivering, but we have a resolution to seek funding for a scope of a project if we're successful at a Tier 2 facility. So once the project comes back off the table, that report's considered, there will be some further actions that will flow. Naturally, if the recommendations are endorsed, that will lead to credentials and business plans being undertaken.
And do we have in writing from, I can't remember, from previous documentation, in writing for Tennis Australia Court? What have we got from Tennis Australia, basically, without revealing any thing that has to remain confidential?
I believe in the papers that were circulated this afternoon, there was all the support documentation that we've previously received was contained as an attachment. CEO, is that accurate?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct. And also, we received verbal confirmation from Tennis Australia representatives on Friday that they essentially, of course nothing's guaranteed, they is all but guaranteed that court renewal subsidy funding, I think it's called. Yes.
Yes, so all right, I'll just leave it for now, let somebody else.
We might have to extend suspension of any procedures, all those, another half an hour afternoon. This is an important topic, so thank you for that. We're okay to go ahead. All right, so Councillor Hollard, you're next.
With the costings, you have a figure of 10 million on that building. There is always that.
It's not just the building.
No, the project. Sorry,
the whole project.
The whole project. We often see cost blowouts, and post-COVID we've had the building materials, whatever, go up. Things seem to be settling down, but you do just need a small percentage there. Just that 10% could be another million. Have we factored in if we're on a tight line here? Where do we go with any sort of blowout? I mean, we looked at that. What's the possibility of us getting a blowout? It could be because of various factors. Of course, we often see that.
It's a good question. I was actually going to ask the same question.
Yeah.
And I was going to partially answer my own question, so I'll attempt to partially answer your question. I did ask the CEO about that very question because we have had experience with that with Broadview. The Broadview Community Club was done at a time when everything was very much in flux, and it was also every aspect of it was brand new, as would this one be. However, the CEO mentioned that a reasonable proportion of the costs that we could be facing for this project are very well known and very fixed. And aren't likely to flex too much. Of course, the actual building itself is the area where that might happen. So I guess the question is, CEO, if we did manage to pull this funding together and Council was putting forward 3.03, does that include a margin? And if it does, is it, in your experience, a reasonable enough margin to cover most eventualities?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm going to kick this to Mr. Delano, but before I do, I will make one strategic comment, and that is to provide members with an assessment of my absolute confidence in Mr. Delano and his team, evidenced by recent projects like Livingston Avenue and a number of others recently where we've been able to deliver back savings to council, quite significant savings in a couple of cases. Projects that were legacy projects which hadn't been well costed or quantity surveyed prior to Mr. Delana's team having to tackle those challenges and deliver them, they're the ones that we now feel we're at the end of, and I think members hopefully have seen certainly in the last 6 to 12 months a far more professional series of outcomes with projects. Having said that, yes, this budget does include a project contingency, and in terms of what that contingency is and the level of confidence in the costings at this stage, Mr. Delana, can you please answer the question?
Certainly. In terms of some of the level of confidence, I think I'm as confident as I can be at this point in a project's development. We've got a concept design of the courts which is fairly mature. I'd say that costing would be based on at least a 70-80% design, and we have a costing on a facility that is really, luckily, it's 5%. So less design maturity on the actual club room, but we have a footprint layout. We have had it costed through a quantity surveyor, and we have added elements of contingency on top of that for known costs where we know that that we experience in other facilities in terms of transformer upgrades, potentially staging, extra costs for staging the works. There was a number of different elements that we have also considered beyond the cost estimate to make sure that we left no stone unturned. There is broadly a 20% contingency. We had a greater level of contingency than you would have if you had a more mature design, and that is one known way to preserve your position. So I'm very comfortable that we're going to be able to bring this project in at or below the $10 million.
I think just to add to that, there's another element of risk, not necessarily directly financial, and that is things like, let's call it broadly, the community expectation risk, and in particular around the trees, which I think are going to create some challenges for us, and that's a risk that, frankly, we're just going to have to confront and manage as we go, and that might impact design elements, but there are certain knowns in that regard that we can clearly see we won't be able to avoid in terms of tree removal or the like.
I might just see if Lillian's finished with her questions, and then I'll check in with the Deputy Mayor before we go around to...
Some might have been answered as well. I think there was one. I can't think what else he asked now. There's always a chance that this could be voted down. And I was just wondering, I know we voted against the option of sort of a tiered sort of project. It's at a late stage now, we're going for funding, so what are our options if this gets voted down? I mean, where we don't just put it on the table, but, is it just we go for the state funding next election and sort of plan for later, or, do it in a tiered fashion, or, I mean, if the option becomes on the table indefinitely, or we don't know till when, or doing a tiered sort of project.
I can answer a little bit of that. I think I remember when maybe I was watching on YouTube, when the tennis club presented to us at the most recent council meeting, I think the question of doing this as a stage project was asked, and the answer was that given that the courts needed to be reconfigured and relaid out, that would mean that the club rooms would need to be demolished at that part of the process. So in an ideal scenario, you could do parts of it and then do another chunk later on, but I think the way that this project has to unfold, unless I'm mistaken, it appears that it has to be done at the same time. But to your second question, it's a good one. CEO, can you outline any thoughts that you or the team have put into what happens if there isn't support around the table for this approach tonight?
So, Mr. Mayor, I actually invited members to consider that very question on page 9 of the report. And in essence, there are a raft of options, more than I can potentially walk members through tonight. But the core question is, if you don't support the third funding model as proposed, members, we really need then, I think, to go back to the drawing board and think about what we're going to do about this, and that's that could be around prioritisation of the project. It could be around reviewing scope. It could be, there's a raft of things, but frankly, if members aren't prepared to push forward with this, and we know that this pursuing 95% funding is essentially a waste of time, I would invite members to consider seeking a workshop on this project to review pretty much everything around what we've assumed in this project. Going back to Councillor De Backer's point, this project's been on the table since well before I was the CEO of this council. There was funding assigned to this project when I arrived that had been carried over a year or two prior to that. And there'd been ORSA grant applications submitted. It was competing with the Broadview Football Club when that project was originally funded. It was competing with Prospect when that one was funded too. So as far as I'm aware, this project has been, and then we delayed, I think, further applications at some point because of the question of governance. So this council has long believed that this project had value and wanted to fund it, and had put aside a significant chunk of funding to support that delivery. Now, put aside the fact of whether or not that was enough funding, and certainly in the pre-COVID years, we thought differently about the projects and cost and scale, and obviously Tier 2 was not being considered at that point either. So a lot has changed, and clearly since then members have now bought into the PLP challenge, which presents its own challenges as well. So I would suggest, members, that there's so much water that's passed under the bridge that if you're not prepared to support this, let's go back to the drawing board, let's have a workshop. Our club representatives over here are not going to like me hearing me say that, but I think if members can't support this, then we have to go back and revisit everything. That's my sense. Now, there are obviously a lot of other options that members could consider, but without workshopping every single one of them tonight, that would be my best suggestion. We've got a lot on in the next couple of months. Let's get to a workshop sometime mid to late this year and we'll work through it.
Thank you, Councillor Hoyt. Deputy Mayor Trinder Wynne, have you got any questions?
Yeah, so a lot of the questions on today's have been raised, but one of the things for me being my first time on council, if we were to go with this option, it's saying that it will potentially constrain future chambers, and I just want to know if that has happened in the past, because I just don't think it's fair for future chambers to be restricted because of a decision we've made during this term. So has this happened before where money has been put aside for future chambers so that it affected their decision making?
Councillor Barnett's been around the longest out of anyone. I would say it probably happens in every chamber council. To be honest, I would say invariably that there are decisions made at local, state and federal level during terms in council that have an impact on what happens in the next term of council. So whilst it's a true statement, I think it's part and parcel of us doing business, to be honest. There was things that this term of council inherited from the previous one, and you just have to deal with those things. And I think that actually makes sense, because it doesn't make quite as much sense to make decisions that have an end date when the rest of life continues fairly fluidly. So I agree with your point. It could have an impact on decision-making capacity for future terms of council, but the same might be said for setting rates during this budget process and setting rates during the next budget process as well. They also could constrain decision-making in the future.
But this would particularly be restricting, funding for certain things, to certain projects and other community projects as well. So.
Oh yeah, definitely, yeah.
Without increasing rates to fund projects.
Well, it's obviously a mix of what do we want to not do, and what do we want to do in general.
And the other question was, I guess, if in the if we don't get the funding, I just want to be reminded again. So if we don't get the funding from state and government, where does that put this project?
CEO I figure that in your report you might have outlined what the fallback position is for this project.
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Mayor, very broadly again, page 9, but it's a choose your own adventure in some senses. What I've suggested in the report is, members, you do need to turn your mind to what happens if you set aside the 1/3 and then we're unsuccessful. We get to May 3rd, somebody wins, we haven't got a promise, but we've put aside this 1/3, what do we do with it? Members, you may wish to hang on to that in sort of and pitch it to Lucy and is it Jason at the next state campaign? Julian, sorry, at the next state campaign.
Mil.
Yeah, but again with a third, right? So you try and involve the feds again at that point, or you could go back to the drawing board at that point and figure out what to do. And there are a raft of other options, but those are the two I think I'd be suggesting council consider.
Yeah. So we have to go back to the drawing board if this is successful.
Well, you know, if you set aside the 1/3 funding, you could quarantine it, and certainly this council did do that for some years with a big chunk of nearly $1 million. A big chunk now we've spent sort of designing, getting the project where it is now. Some of which we've used update, doing some little here and there around it with the lights and that sort of thing. So you could quarantine it, but that of course then creates that ongoing opportunity cost year on year. But it does quarantine that funding in case the opportunity does arise. So there are costs and benefits to that.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Okay, so everyone's had a crack. Now we can go back around for round 2 if there's any more questions, because of course we'll leave comments and our views to debate. But any more questions?
Yes, I think it might give me a bit more comfort if I could have our independent board committee's views. What would be the earliest that we could have an audit committee?
It's one of the 22nd of April.
It's in 2 weeks.
So, and where's that fit in with timing for this?
It's before the budget, before the election, but obviously after this meeting tonight. And the challenge, members, through you, Mr. Mayor, the challenge here is that it was made very clear to us that the window for opportunity here is rapidly closing. Members, I've got confidence in my finance team that we can afford this. And as a result, I have confidence that going to the audit committee, they might not be thrilled with us spending more money, but we're spending money that we have the capacity to spend and all that's in our asset management plans. So the likelihood of them pushing back really hard on that in a way that we can't manage or respond to is very, very low. It's not zero, of course, but it's in my estimation, it's very, very low. So really the primary issue for council to consider is the merits of this decision, and primarily on that, the opportunity cost of the projects you're going to kick out, and obviously that additional debt capacity that you are swallowing up through this project, that extra $1 million. Is it worth the possibility of securing $6.5 odd million in funding from state and federal partners to support the delivery of what will be the second or third most impressive tennis facility in the state? It's a big prize that we understood members wanted. We know the club wants it, but it also comes at a cost. But again, through the state and federal election process, that cost, relatively speaking, is far reduced. But only if we put in enough skin in the game. That's the question.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Howard.
I know we've had a situation recently with winning both state and federal funding. If we did win that federal funding, or that came through, would our chances improve with state, having them put aside, a promise of funding there? If they win, does that increase our chances with a first success? Or are they both on that? Doesn't make much difference. I mean, we had that with our recent drainage.
Slightly different.
Well, because one was seen to have gone through.
I think the difficulty with answering that question is that it depends on who wins. Federal.
Yes, of course, but
and
they
then-
still have to. They still propose it that's what you get. So you do. You
Well,
have
they would
that
probably
element,
propose.
obviously.
They would probably
but
propose that if they got elected, they would.
Yeah.
That they're committing these funds. I don't
so
think.
are we saying that, the conversations you've had, that they are willing to propose these amounts?
We haven't gone to them yet with
So
this. With
we
this
still
model.
don't even know if they're
Well,
so
we-
we completely.
We haven't gone to them with this model
Yeah.
yet. That's what we. If this recommendation is supported tonight, then the team will. As I said, we've got a meeting with Steve Georgianis, and I'll book a meeting with Amy Grantham, and we will take this new model to them in the next few days. And I think anything else apart from that would just be an opinion, and I think if we went around the table, we might get 8 different opinions or 20 different opinions, because it's impossible to say. You would like to think yes, it would give you more opportunity, but you just don't know how things are going to line up. Any more questions around the table, Councillor Nelson? Is anything else coming to your mind?
Oh, just your comments, Neil.
Yeah.
I think everyone's asked the right questions.
All right. If there are no more questions, then I'll surprisingly early bring us back into formal session. So, we have a recommendation on page 4, and I am looking for someone to move the motion to support or reject the platform. Say that a bit more loudly. So I'm looking for a mover for this motion to get it on the floor so we can enter into debate. Deputy Mayor Twin De Win would like to speak to the motion.
Supporting or rejecting?
Oh, sorry, yes,
I'll support it's put on the table for debate. It is a hard one. It is taking up a lot of funding from future projects. I know this is something that the tennis group has been wanting, and it's been a long time coming, and I understand that. But yeah, like it's going to be able to get the support from federal and state, some of them as well, and then what's happening with the project. So there's still questions on this one.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Stanton, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yeah, briefly. This project has been a long time coming. I can remember my first term of council. I can remember sitting in a crowded little room with stakeholders all sitting looking at each other and not doing very much. And it stalemated back then, and to get it to this point is, I think, quite amazing. I think if we've got any opportunity to move it forward, if we have the capacity to do so, which all accounts we do have the capacity, I think it's time that we move it forward. And I hope to support the motion.
Thank you. Any further discussion, any points that haven't been raised yet? Councillor Nelson is
With a smile.
gagging to.
I'm not gagging, but I do feel I do feel I want to have a say, because I do note that there are representatives here from the tennis club. So welcome to the gents, and I've been a huge advocate for this project. I think if we go back to the records, it was Mark Britt and I that sort of pushed this through and really pushed for the tier 2, and I would love to have a tier 2 tennis facility in this city. I think it would be fantastic for us. But of course, there are times that I think council needs to live within our means. Councillor Stanton mentioned to me a while ago that you don't go putting in a pool when your roof's leaking. And there's a lot of competing priorities around the city that we have, not the least being the PLP. We've already invested a lot of that, and we heard from our residents and our community on Saturday and the last few months about our competing priorities and why we're putting certain things over other things, which makes it really difficult because I have such a passion for this project. But this proposal, obviously, first needs to have federal funding, which I think is going to be difficult. I guess you guys have had the meetings, but I think it's going to be very difficult 3 weeks out from the election. particularly the fact the City of the Adelaide seat is a safe Labor seat. They have no real intention of having to spend money in this seat. Then we've got to get state funding, which I think is also going to be difficult. Then we've got to have a loan approved. And I just think with the competing priorities we have, I think this has inherent risk. For me, I'd rather that we reject this and bring it back to a workshop at different options, whether that's a staged approach, whether it's a different funding approach. I'm very passionate about this project, but I think we've got to be smarter and start living within our means. So I'll be rejecting this.
Thank you. Councillor De Backer.
Yeah, look, similarly to Councillor Nelson, probably for slightly different reasons, but on page 74 we had an advocacy document which was $500,000, and some could argue that's too low. So I think we went out thinking the feds were going to support everything, and I think it would be unreasonable. But I think there has to be compromise both ways. I think having a tier 2 versus what we have the capacity to fund, because this is ratepayer money. This is every ratepayer in the city. And so when we talk about, going from 500,000 to 3 million, what's the benefit for the community? So I know we talked about community use, but it may be that we look at a licence agreement instead of a lease agreement, but that might not be what the club wants. So I think we've really got to come back to a workshop. And it might be that we say, yes, instead of 500,000, we really need to keep 1.5, but instead of a tier 2, it might end up being tier 3. I just think, again, I would have liked to have seen asset management, just as Scoza said, which are the ones that have critical need, because we've got to take a small amount of funds across the whole city, across all our assets, and we've got lots of projects on the go. So I think just from an equity point of view and a visibility point of view for the people watching tonight, we're being really, really careful. And it's so hard because we know all these projects want funds, but at the same time, we've got to compromise it both ways. So, I'm hesitant, but I'm happy to hear debate to be swayed otherwise.
Thank you, Councillor Backer. I might just jump in and put my views forward from the chair, if that's okay. So, a few things I would say. This is a 50-year investment, so it seems like a lot of money right now, but we're not talking about something which is expendable or consumable that's going to be used up in a couple of years' time. If we do this right, as we have a great track record of doing things in the city of Prospect, this is a 50-year investment. So if you think about the cost of doing it now compared to in 5 or 10 years' time, and if you think about the cost amortised over 50 years and what benefit the community will achieve from that perspective, $3 million is a lot of money, but it's also not a huge amount of money when you look at it from that perspective. So yeah, we have got a good track record of making the right decisions. I think it's very easy to potentially fall into a bit of a trap of taking a cheaper approach, but we'll probably regret it a lot sooner than if we take the full approach here. The reality is that this is a once in a 3-year opportunity to potentially tap into budget and election funding. We don't know, as Councillor Nelson pointed out, whether we've got much of a chance, but if we don't have a go at this, we have zero chance of getting any federal funding as part of this election round, which almost certainly means we won't have any chance of getting a significant proportion of money at a state level. So the knock-on effect of saying no tonight, if this is rejected, is that this proposal is essentially put to bed for many years to come. It's been on the table for at least 15 years, and looking at the list of suggestions that the staff have put forward with regards to projects we might delay, I can't see anything that comes close to being more valuable to the community than any of those projects there. There are some that are deserving and they've been sitting around for a while, but I can't see anything there which, in my opinion, is a more important decision for us to make. So I think it's good bang for buck overall. I think that I personally can't see what we would do to take this back to a workshop. I think this has been done so many times over. I think we've been through it with a fine-tooth comb many, many times over. It's been through the ringer. It's been through countless rounds of design. And we're at a point where we've invested money. I'd hate to see that money that we've already invested go down the drain and us having to put forward a budget bid for another $100,000 for a new design project in a couple of years' time. So I really personally can't see how we can workshop this anymore. I think there are some risks involved with this, as there is in any large decision, but as the CEO has said, I've got confidence in the team with regards to the prudential side of this, and I won't have to vote on this because it's not going to be a split vote, but if I did have to vote, I'd be voting in favour of it. So that's my piece. Any further discussion that we haven't heard from Councillor Barnett?
Yes. I mean, when you think back, when we did our strategic plan, and we've done quite a lot, you know, of strategic planning, and we come up with ideas, projects, things that are on our asset management plan. So we've always got the plans there to go for funding, to go for different grants. So in a sense, I don't see really much difference from what we're doing with this. It's been done over many years, has had various reiterations, and I think there was always intent. It didn't matter whether it was Tier 3 or Tier 2 or whatever. But things have changed since we had the first strategic plan for all that precinct around the Broadview Oval and around there. And things have changed with, as we've seen with Prospect Tennis Club and other sporting groups, that the conditions change and the standards change. And if I just think perhaps if we're going to wait yet again for another few years, well, it's not going to get any less costly, it's going to become more costly. So as much as, you know, and also with our asset management planning over our playgrounds that we've been doing, we've always had, you know, to put in for funding, that we would put in for grants to help us to achieve that, and we've done that quite successfully. And I think based on what the CEO and the two directors have said, that we've got it manageable in terms of our long-term asset management, in terms of any of our borrowing, or the new loan funding. Now, I'm thinking that it should be supported, because if we don't vote for it, we know we're not going to get it, basically. If we do support it, we may not get the amount of money that we want. It may be, you know, who knows. But at any rate, we have to deal with that when it comes back to us. And that's the time then when we can say, right, well, perhaps if we can do without the top floor and save, I don't know, $100,000 or whatever it is, there's another iteration of it. So I think I'm prepared for all those reasons and other reasons that we should give it a go and then wait and see what happens.
Thank you, Councillor Barnett. Any further discussion? Councillor Nguyen.
Thank you for the discussion tonight. You know, this afternoon while I was reading this one, I was thinking, wow, that's, you know, there's a lot of information in there, and I didn't know where, you know, where to sit. But the discussion has really helped me. You know, when we talk about a project, sometimes you get really excited. This one, I'm excited, but then there's so many red flags and just so many question marks. And I think about the, you know, if we were to go with this, the opportunity cost, what will we miss out? But then again, I think back, you know, what decision are we making today? I'm happy to, you know, go with, you know, the recommendation of putting that money aside. And if Councillor Christina Barnett has said, like, if the next, at the next stage, whether we get the funding from federal and state, we tackle it there. But tonight, you know, as a decision has to be made just based on the information, I will support it, because, you know, when we come to the next stage, we'll deal with them. But if we don't make a decision tonight about, you know, allocating that money, we won't have skin in the game, and so we'll miss that opportunity.
Thank you. Councillor Holland.
this came to us only a few hours ago, so I initially, you need to look at the risks of what projects, could be at risk, but sort of had time, lots of discussion. And I think a lot of those, because there were a few and they're smaller projects, I think they can eventually get on the table to the same standard. I'm seeing that, just to put this aside, if this gets voted down, the risk is we may never, we might not see that tier 2, and it could be years away. And it's correct, 3 million is not a huge amount now, but it's dependent on what we can get. I mean, we're not. And my concern too was that an interest rate rise would impact my decision, a rate rise, sorry, for ratepayers. But I think I feel confident that the team here has got a good report. The financials seem to stack. I'm fairly confident in what's been presented here as working. So I think I will support this. I was very much on the fence, I'd say, beforehand, but a lot of my questions have been answered. And, I think it's an opportunity that we might not come across our table, for a while. So I think I'll.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah. Everyone's had a chance to say something, so now I will head back to the Deputy Mayor to sum up.
Thank you for the debate. It's still unsure, but I guess if we don't pass this motion, we will find an opportunity for a while again. So I think it's great for us to support it and see try our best to if possible. And if not, we're just going to have to let's just support it and see what we can get and yeah, whatever the outcome is from the funding, we can then still have more time to discuss.
Thank you, Councillor. Sorry, Deputy Mayor. A question from you, Councillor.
Just ask if we can take it in parts.
Just waiting for that, and of course, I'm happy to take it in parts. Okay, that brings us to the end of the debate. Let's put it to the vote. So we'll go all those in favour and all those against for the 7 components. Part 1, all those in favour. Against, carried unanimously. Part 2, all those in favour. Against, carried unanimously. Part 3, all those in favour. Against, carried unanimously. Part 4, all those in favour. All those against. Motion carried. Division, okay, alright, I've got a 50% chance of getting this right. If you voted in favour of this, then please stand up.
We'll stand as long as you need.
Thank you, you can now sit for the time being. Part 5, all those in favour. 2, 3, 4, 5, all those against. Motion carried.
Revision.
Again, you may stand if you voted in favour of. Just give Gwen a chance to stretch.
Janet,
That would be revealing your strategy. Thank you. Parts, I'll just write here. So we're assuming it's part 6, all those in favour. Against. Motion carried. Okay. The 5 who voted in favour, please stand for the record. Nikki, you may resume your seats. Last part, part 7, all those in favour? Against, carried unanimously. Okay. Great discussion. Obviously, we would have preferred to have more time and more information, but I'd like to thank the team for pulling out all stops to get together what they did. It's back in our hands now, and we'll resume our advocacy. No guarantees of anything, but at least we have the opportunity to revisit. And I appreciate everyone's contribution. We'll declare the meeting closed at 7:25. 7:25. Thanks.